Somebody making $100,000 a year is lying awake tonight, doing math on a phone, trying to figure out where it all went. Not somebody making minimum wage, $100,000, and they still can't sleep. That's not a hypothetical, that's most of the country right now. Here's the strange part, it's not really about how much they earn. There are 4 levels to how money actually works, and almost everyone alive right now, regardless of income, is stuck on the very first one without ever realizing there were 3 more above it. By the end of this video, you're going to know all 4, exactly which one you're standing on right now, and exactly what it takes to move to the next one. But to actually understand why so many people get stuck on level 1, we first need to talk about what money actually is, because most of us have never really stopped to ask. So let's start with the obvious question. What actually is money? Not a trick question. Try to answer it honestly. Is it the paper, the metal, the number on your banking app? Here's the thing. Money existed as a concept before any of those things did. Before coins, before paper currency. People were trading value long before anyone minted a single coin, which means money was never really the object. Money is a unit, a way of measuring something else entirely, and that something else has a name most people have never actually sat down and thought about. Perceived value. Stay with me here because this is where it gets interesting. Think about why one candidate wins an election over another, even when neither one is objectively more qualified. Think about why one company's stock is worth billions more than a competitor selling a nearly identical product. Think about why one actor gets paid $40 million for a movie and another, doing comparable work, gets a fraction of that. It's not always about who provides the most value. It's about who people believe provides the most value. That belief is doing almost all the work, and once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. 2 coffee shops on the same street can sell nearly identical coffee, made from nearly identical beans, and one charges $2 more per cup and has a line out the door, while the other sits half empty. Nothing about the coffee itself explains that gap. The gap lives entirely in perception. A worker on a factory floor can put in 16 hours a day. And if 100 other people could walk in tomorrow and do that same job just as well, that worker's perceived value stays low no matter how hard they work. Hard work and high pay are not the same thing. They just get taught to us like they are. Now picture the person running that factory. They might work 6 hours that day, might spend half of it in a meeting, but almost nobody else could step into that seat and run things the same way. That scarcity, that difficulty to replace is what perceived value actually is, and it's why the paycheck looks completely different. So if you actually want to earn more, here's the real lever. It's not just working harder, it's becoming harder to replace. Getting better at the specific thing you do until fewer and fewer people could do it as well as you. This is also why the last decade has quietly rewritten a lot of career advice that used to make sense. Being good at your job used to be enough because the only people who knew you were good were the people in the room with you. Now, perceived value can travel. A freelancer with a strong public portfolio, a consultant who's built a reputation online, a specialist who's known for one very specific skill, they're competing on perceived value at a scale that simply didn't exist before because reputation itself became something you could build in public instead of something that only spread by word of mouth inside one office. That cuts both ways, by the way. It means someone with real skill and no visibility can get passed over for someone with a great personal brand and mediocre actual output. Perceived value and real value aren't always the same thing, and the gap between them is exactly where a lot of frustration in modern careers comes from. But understanding that the gap exists is still more useful than pretending it doesn't. But here's where almost everyone stops. Right here, at the idea that earning more is the whole goal. It isn't. Earning more is step 0. The real game hasn't even started yet. There are 4 levels to what I'm going to call the actual money game. And what's strange is, crossing them has almost nothing to do with how much you make. I've seen people earning very little who've crossed further than people earning 6 figures. Level 1 is awareness, not the vague sense that money comes in and money goes out. Real awareness. Knowing with total certainty exactly where every single dollar you earn actually goes. Could you tell me right now exactly what happened to every dollar you earned last month? Not roughly. Exactly. Most people can't. And here's why that matters more than it sounds like it should. If you don't know where your money is actually going, you are, by definition, not in control of it. It's controlling you. Here's what convinced me how rare this actually is. The average American thinks they're spending about $86 a month on subscriptions. The actual number is $219, off by 2.5 times, and not because anyone's bad at math. Money just has a way of disappearing in amounts too small to notice. One forgotten charge at a time, until you're paying for services you stopped using a year ago and genuinely didn't remember existed. If you're being honest with yourself right now, there's a decent chance you're part of that statistic too. Most people are. But subscriptions are really just the most visible symptom. Awareness has to go further than that. It means understanding your actual spending patterns, not the ones you assume you have. Most people, if you ask them cold, would guess they spend more on rent than on food, more on gas than on impulse purchases, more on bills than on convenience. Sometimes that's true, often it isn't, and the only way to know for certain is to actually look. Here's something worth sitting with. Nearly half of Americans carrying a credit card balance right now aren't carrying it because of something exciting. Not a vacation, not a big purchase. They're carrying it because groceries, utilities, and basic healthcare cost more than what's coming in that month. The credit card isn't the problem in that situation. It's a symptom of a gap that awareness would have caught months earlier, before it became debt at over 20% interest. That's the real cost of skipping level 1. Not just a wasted subscription here and there. The compounding cost of not seeing a gap coming until it's already turned into a balance you're paying interest on. Here's something I think is worth admitting honestly. Most people don't avoid tracking their money because it's hard. People avoid it because some part of them doesn't want to know the answer. There's a particular kind of dread in opening a banking app after a rough month. A kind of bracing yourself. And the easiest way to avoid that feeling is to just not look. Let the number stay a little blurry. Because a blurry number is somehow less frightening than a sharp one, even when the sharp one would actually help you. But that avoidance has a cost, and it compounds just like debt does. Every month you don't look is another month the pattern continues unchecked. The spending keeps drifting in whatever direction it's already drifting. And the fear that made you avoid looking in the first place only grows because deep down, you know the gap between what you think is happening and what's actually happening is getting wider, not narrower. That's level 1, not complicated, just rare, because it requires actually looking. Here's what usually happens once people actually do this properly. They find the leaks, they plug most of them, and then something strange happens that nobody warns you about. The extra money doesn't stay extra for long. A raise comes through, or the subscription savings free up an extra $150 a month, and almost immediately life quietly expands to absorb it. A nicer version of the same purchases, a slightly bigger apartment, food delivery a little more often because now it feels affordable. There's a name for this, lifestyle inflation. And it's not really about willpower or discipline, even though it gets talked about that way. It's about a very human tendency to recalibrate what feels normal almost instantly, so that yesterday's luxury becomes today's baseline within a few months, and the baseline just keeps climbing every time income does. This is exactly why earning more, on its own, so rarely solves the underlying stress. The number changes. The gap between what comes in and what goes out doesn't, because the goalposts moved right along with the income. Level 2 is the direct answer to that trap. It's the level where you stop letting the goalposts move automatically and start deciding on purpose where the line actually sits. Level 2 is where it gets harder, and where almost nobody actually goes. Once you've done level 1 properly, you now know something specific, your burn rate, the exact amount of money it takes to keep your current life running for 1 month. Rent, food, insurance, all of it, added up into one real number. Here's what you do with that number. If you're an employee, multiply it by 6. If you run your own business, multiply it by 12. Whatever comes out of that equation, that's what some people call your number. Not a rich number. A safe number, the amount that if you had it sitting untouched would mean a lost job or a bad month in the business couldn't actually take you down. Saving that number is genuinely difficult. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but once you have it, something shifts. Big decisions stop being terrifying, because the fear underneath most bad financial decisions is the fear of not having a cushion. Once the cushion exists, the fear loses its grip. This isn't a new idea, by the way, even if it feels like one. There's an entire movement built around a version of this math, going back to a book from 1992 called Your Money or Your Life. The people who built on that idea came up with something called the 25 times rule. Figure out your annual expenses, multiply by 25, and that's roughly the number that lets your investments alone cover your life without you needing to work at all. That's a more extreme version of level 2, honestly. What we're talking about here is a smaller, faster milestone on the same road. 6 to 12 months of expenses saved isn't financial independence. But it's the first real proof that you're capable of building toward it, and it's the number that actually stops the bleeding long enough for level 3 to matter. Level 3 is where money stops being something you only earn and starts being something that earns for you. There's an old line, often credited to Warren Buffett, that gets thrown around so much it's almost lost its meaning. If you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you'll work until you die. It sounds like a slogan, but sit with it for a second, because it's describing exactly the gap between level 2 and level 3. Here's the uncomfortable truth about relying purely on active income. If you can't work for a month, for any reason your income doesn't just slow down, for most people, it stops. There's no fallback layer underneath it. Level 3 is building that layer. Putting money somewhere, it grows on its own, whether or not you're actively working that day. Let me give you a number that puts this in perspective. If you'd put $10,000 into Nvidia stock 10 years ago and genuinely done nothing else, just left it alone, that investment would be worth somewhere between $1 million and $1.7 million today, depending on the exact entry point. Compare that to the same $10,000 sitting in a broad market index fund over that same decade. Still a solid outcome, something in the range of $40,000. Good. Not the same universe as the other number. Now, I'm not telling you to go buy Nvidia stock tomorrow. Hindsight makes every winning bet look obvious, and for every Nvidia, there are stocks that went to zero. That's not the point. The point is the mechanism. Money sitting in motion, compounding, working while you sleep, behaves completely differently than money sitting still in a checking account. And you don't need thousands of dollars to start participating in that mechanism. Fractional investing exists specifically so $20 can buy a sliver of an expensive stock instead of requiring the full share price. The amount you start with matters far less than the fact that you started. This doesn't have to be stocks either. Real estate works on the same underlying principle, an asset that grows or generates income independent of your daily labor. So does owning a piece of a business instead of just trading your hours for a paycheck. The vehicle changes. The mechanism, money working instead of just time working, stays the same. One honest caveat here, because I'd rather you hear it from this video than learn it the expensive way. The Nvidia example is real, but it's also survivorship bias in action. For every story like that, there are companies that looked just as promising a decade ago and are worth close to nothing today. The version of level 3 that actually works for most people isn't picking the next Nvidia. It's consistently putting money into broad, diversified investments over a long period of time and letting compounding do the slow, unglamorous work. It's a much less exciting story to tell. It's also the one that statistically holds up. Level 4 is the one almost nobody reaches, and it's the one that actually changes everything. I want to be honest about something first. There's no ceiling on wanting more money. That hunger doesn't switch off just because you hit a number. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something more specific. The point where the money you've put to work, level 3's money, starts generating enough on its own to cover your burn rate, that number from level 2, without you lifting a finger. Once that crossover happens, everything changes. Not because you suddenly have unlimited money, but because your survival stops depending on today's effort. Whether you work today or don't. Whether the job is going well or badly. Whether the business has a great quarter or a rough one. None of it threatens the foundation anymore, because the foundation isn't standing on your daily effort. It's standing on money that's already working, independent of you. Here's what that actually looks like in practice, because it's easy for this to stay abstract. Say your burn rate, that monthly number from level 1, is $4,000. Level 4 isn't some fantasy number in the tens of millions. It's the point where your investments, your real estate, whatever you've built in level 3 are reliably generating $4,000 a month on their own through dividends, rental income, interest, growth you can draw from safely. At that point, the job becomes optional in a way most people never experience. Not because you're rich in some flashy sense, but because the machine underneath you keeps running whether you show up to work tomorrow or not. That's the actual definition of freedom this whole game is pointing toward, and it has almost nothing to do with the number people usually picture when they hear the word rich. That's the whole map. 4 levels. And here's what nobody tells you. Level 0, just earning more, is the level almost everyone gets stuck on for their entire life, because nobody ever explained there was anywhere else to go. If any of this actually landed, here's what I do this week, in order, because the order matters more than people think. Don't skip to investing because it sounds exciting. Start with the boring part. Track every dollar for 30 days. 4 columns is enough. Where it came from, how much came in, how much went out, and what category it falls under. When you spend on something, write down what it actually was, not later, in the moment while you remember. Do that honestly for 1 month, and you will understand your own financial life better than most people understand theirs after decades of just hoping it works out. Then calculate your burn rate, then your number. Then, only then, start thinking about where your money could start working instead of just sitting there. Skip the order, and you're not playing the game. You're gambling with money you don't actually understand yet. I'm not going to pretend I've personally crossed every one of these levels either. I haven't. But I know exactly which level I'm standing on right now and exactly what number I'm working toward next. That clarity alone changes how every financial decision gets made, because you're no longer guessing. You're just executing a plan you can actually see. And that might be the real difference between the person lying awake doing math on their phone and the person who isn't. Not how much they earn, just whether they know the game they're actually playing. Picture 2 people, both starting this year making the exact same salary, $70,000, same city, same rent, roughly. One of them keeps chasing the number. 70 becomes 90, 90 becomes 120. Every raise gets absorbed almost instantly. A nicer apartment, a nicer car, dinners out that used to feel like a treat and now just feel normal. 5 years later, they're earning nearly double what they started with, and they're just as stressed about money as they were on day 1. Maybe more, because now there's more to lose. The other one does something less exciting. They track every dollar for a month. The boring part, almost nobody actually does. They find their burn rate. They chip away at 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account, slowly, unglamorously, while their friends post vacation photos. Once that cushion exists, they start putting a piece of every paycheck into an index fund. Not because they're trying to get rich quick, but because they finally understand that money sitting still is money doing nothing. Same 5 years, same starting salary, completely different relationship with every single dollar that crosses their path. Neither one of them is smarter, neither one is luckier. One of them just found out earlier that the goal was never the number on the paycheck. The goal was understanding the game underneath it.